Hello, everyone. Now, today, I'm going to be teaching AI to collaborate. But before I do so, I really want to stress the importance of collaboration. Collaboration is everywhere you see. To the clothes you're wearing, to the phones in your pockets, and the seats you're under, and the GPUs on Rosie. And honestly, most things of value have been made by teams of people working collaboratively. Now, it's clearly an important skill in humanity, but giving this skill to AI could be equally as important. But before we give them the skill, the first step of teaching AI to collaborate is to ensure that they're competent as individuals. We've all been in that one group project. And with that in mind, I want to introduce you to my friend Chris. Now, Chris is European, which means that when he says football, he means soccer. That's the only time I've been saying that word in this entire presentation. Now, something about him is that he's not very good at football, but it's okay, because we're going to make it better with something called reinforcement learning. Now, reinforcement learning works like this. At any point, Chris, the player, sees the environment, the game, everything in it. And with this information, he makes an action, a decision, such as move to a specific place, such as kick the ball. Now, it's going to learn through a couple of things. One is going to be experience, which is going to be the history of things that it's seen and done. And the other thing is going to be rewards, which we can kind of think of like cookies. Cookies are going to be this like motivating factor for the player. At any point, it's going to try and learn the actions, which maximizes its cookies now and going into the future. And because of this, it's kind of important what we give it cookies for. So what are we going to give it cookies for? Well, for a bunch of stuff. For example, for going to the ball, we're going to give it something like cookie crumbs, because it's important, but it's not really as important as something as moving the ball to the goal, which for that, we'll give it something like a small cookie. But if it ever does the only thing that matters in football, which is scoring a goal, we're going to give it a massive 100 fresh cookies. Now, something else we're going to do is going to be adding a coach. So the player is going to play the game, but the coach is going to do something really interesting. At the end of the game, it's going to take the player aside, and it's going to say, you know what? Maybe in this scenario, you should have done this instead of that. I feel like you would have gotten more cookies. This directly ties into something called the policy gradient theorem, which tells us how we change the brain of the player. And this is more formally called the actor-critic architecture, where the actor is the one that plays the game, and the critic is the one that gives this important feedback. All of this, with a bunch of other stuff, makes up an algorithm called PPO, which we're going to be using. But with everything cleared up, let's see a play. Now, at the very beginning, game 0, the play is not very good. The ball's in the middle, by the way. It's just moving randomly. But after a bunch of experience, a bunch of rewards, and 20,000 games, well, it's a different story. The player now is getting comfortable with moving the ball, and is much better at putting bangers, or putting very good goals. And because of this, now I want to introduce you to the new version of Chris, Chris 2.0. Now he's competent as an individual. Now he's good. But if we're going to see how he does as a team, we need to give him a team. We're going to have to turn this into a proper game of football. But before this, I need to clear some stuff up, before we just see them play. Number one, players aren't going to be able to speak or listen to each other. There's no way for them to be able to communicate information. But they do have the ability to see each other on their location and use this information in the decision making. The third thing, which is really important, is that the players are going to share this actor-critic architecture, which means a bunch of stuff. One is going to mean that players are kind of like clones, which means they're going to share the same brain, and they're always going to share the same brain, always doing the same exact action in the same exact scenario. Additionally, this does mean that each player is going to have a specific coach, a specific person giving them specifically feedback. Additionally, this means that the coaches are also going to be clones, giving the same feedback to the same person in the same scenario. Well, with this cleared up, let's see them play as a team. Now, we haven't even started thinking of collaboration, and we're starting to see some initial signs in the form of role development. We're seeing a goalie and then 2 set of attackers. The attackers have this really interesting behavior. But they seem to like clump up and like chase the ball as a collective, which honestly seems a little stupid. But it honestly makes a little bit of sense. 1, because we're giving them rewards for going to the ball. 2, because they're clones and they're very similar scenarios, and similar scenarios mean they would likely do similar actions. But 3, and most importantly, is because they have no way of coordinating with each other who stays on the ball and who leaves the ball. Now, this looks pretty good, but there's a lot to be decided in terms of collaboration. There's no passing, there's no strategy, there's no clever positioning. So when I took this, I aimed to enhance their collaboration. Now, when I was starting on this project, I did a bunch of research. And when I was doing a bunch of research, I encountered this really interesting paper, which introduced an algorithm called MAC. Now, MAC did something really interesting. It used something called attention, which I'll explain in a couple of slides, in the coach. Essentially, this meant that the coaches could communicate with each other, align on what feedback they were going to give to the players. If my coach is going to tell me to defend, it might tell the other coach to tell their player to attack. Essentially, this meant that they could get better feedback. But it's important to note that these coaches aren't used in the game. They're only used after when they're getting the feedback. There was still no way for the players to be able to communicate. But what if they did? What if we gave them this ability? What if we used attention to allow them to communicate? This could allow them to be able to cooperate and hopefully coordinate and most hopefully collaborate. And that would mean that attention is used in this game. But what is attention? Attention, we can kind of think of the selective gathering of information from any player. At any point, a player can go to another player, use their information, and use it into the decision making. We can kind of think of this as mind reading powers, because they can choose to go read the minds of other players and use these thoughts into their decision making, which could be quite powerful. And this idea is what led the backbone of our TAC algorithm, standing for Team Attention Actor Critic. Now, TAC is unique in a couple ways. One is the specific way that we use attention to promote collaboration in both the actor and the critic. But then additionally is something that we've used called conformity laws. We don't have time to explain conformity laws, but essentially what I try to do is try to encourage diverse actions within the players. Now, the algorithm looks a little bit like this, which is a little messy, but we can simplify it to this. And I'm gonna walk you through it. At any given point, a player is gonna make an observation, a set of information which is unique to them. This observation is gonna get passed through a deep learning model to generate a bunch of thoughts, what they're seeing, what they're thinking. These thoughts are gonna go through attention, where they're gonna start to read each other's thoughts, and naturally from reading each other's thoughts, they're gonna have a new set of thoughts. These new thoughts are gonna go through another deep learning model, which are gonna generate their action, which we would hope is collaborative. Now with this cleared up, it's time to go to testing. And testing sets are gonna be quite unique, because we don't wanna just ensure that they're winning games, but we wanna ensure that they're doing so collaboratively. So we're gonna have to measure both things. Performance is easy to measure. We just look at their win rate, are they winning games? But collaboration is a very tricky thing to measure. I tried. And we use a lot of different metrics, but the one I really want to showcase to you is one that we've designed called connectivity, which is measured by the line of sights, showcasing working on the assumption that line of sights means they're better positioned and likely working as a team. Now we've tested a bunch of different algorithms. We test TAC, which is our own. We've also tested MAC, which is the one in the paper, and we've tested PPO, which you described at the beginning. We trained all of these for 400,000 games. And then when it came to testing, we put them against each other randomly for 5,000 games, and we got some results. So let's talk about them. Now I'm going to show you a nice little graph. Here on the x-axis, we have TAC, PPO, and MAC respectively. On the y-axis, we have the corresponding win rate, showcasing that TAC is, by a lot, winning more games than the other players. But are they doing so collaboratively? Well, let's see. Let's see them play. So on the left here, we have TAC. On the right, we have PPO. We've already seen PPO. They have the two players that are chasing the ball and the one player is a goalie. But TAC seems to have this really interesting strategy of going in like this triangle-like formation. This triangle-like formation is pretty powerful because it allows them to be able to pass the ball like they do right now. Wow. And like they do right now. But additionally, this strategy is also good for defending because at any given point, the player in front loses the ball. There's going to be two players behind them to be able to catch it like they do right now, and right now. Now, it looks like they're playing collaboratively with this strategy, but what do the results say? Well, again, on the x-axis, we have TAC, PPO, and MAC. On the y-axis, we have the corresponding connectivity score, showcasing that TAC has by far a much higher connectivity score than the other algorithms, showcasing that they have more lines of sight, and hopefully we can claim that they're working more collaboratively. And with this, I want to introduce you to the final version of Chris O2.5 High Turbo Pro, following the very logical OpenAI naming scheme, showcasing that we can think it's not only good at football, but I hope that we can claim that it's also doing so collaboratively. Now, before I finish, I want to reintroduce you to Rosie. You already know Rosie. Rosie is incredibly fast because of his GPUs, allowing me to run my algorithms at the same speed. But it's also big, and this is something people don't talk a lot about. Its size allowed me to run my games in parallel, getting more experience in the same amount of time. But additionally, it was so big that I could run my parallel games in parallel, running experiments in parallel, allowing me to train different algorithms at the same time, test different ideas on hyperparameters at times, and get results faster. At one point, I even went ham and ran 48 games in parallel. And this was all free. Now, comparing to what I would have used if I didn't have Rosie, would be my MSOE laptop. Now, in comparison, it's pretty slow. It has no parallel games. Let's not even think of parallel experiments. And on average, for a single experiment, it was 8 times slower. However, it is a good source of feed. Now, I do want to showcase that I've used Rosie. So I'll give you some numbers. The number of experiments that I've run on Rosie is over 1,000, and they have summed up to over a year of Rosie usage, and this is all in the 5 months that I've been working on this. If I had to use my laptop, this would have taken me more than 8 years. In this time, I've run over 30 million football simulations, which have summed up to over 60 years of them playing. And if I had used something else to rent the GPU, such as Google Cloud, this would have cost me more than $5,000. Now I know I've said a lot. I know I have been all over the place. But the one thing I want you to take away from this is that maybe in the future, rather than this one AI overlord overseeing everything, it may be a team of AI working together. And in that scenario, we're going to have to teach them how to work together. And I think that the work has showcased that attention could be one of these tools that we use to get them to work together. I don't claim to have the answer, but I think could be a promising avenue. Now, with this being said, I want to thank Jeremy Katsiora for helping me with this project. I want to say goodbye, and thank you all for listening. Any questions?
Great presentation, very entertaining, especially watching the soccer players learn to walk. I guess I did have a question about the training. Usually in these scenarios, there's a balance that you have to find between how much training can be run in parallel. The more that you run in parallel, the faster you can run whatever set of training runs that you want. However, the more you run in parallel, oftentimes the least learning or the lower the learning is fed back into the system. So in your experience for this model, were you able to find an ideal?
So I didn't spend too much time on this balance. The way that I found this balance was just by seeing how many games I can run at any given point, just by testing different games. I probably should have done more experiments, if I'm completely honest, between like running 4 games, running 8 games. There's so many things I can change, and I had only so much time. The number of ones that I decided to go for was 4 games per game. Now, I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. In theory, you'd like to run 1,000 at once, but running 1,000 at once means you don't know.
And there's so many
pull the learning into the next round, right? Yep.
I'll ask you a question about the architecture. So you presented the architecture where you've got the observations, the deep learning models, the attention, deep learning models, and the output, right? So that would sort of imply that this is a generic framework that could be applied beyond video game soccer. Could you speak a little bit about like other areas where it would be easy to apply this, and maybe some areas where it might be a stretch to apply that sort of approach?
Of course. So in environments where it's pure simulations, where there's just a set of input and then a set of actions, this is quite easy to apply. Okay, because of course the players can all share information. In scenarios like this, I think it's quite good. But scenarios where I do think this fails to apply, maybe something like robotics. Because for attention to happen, there needs to be a way for information to be shared across robots. And if robots are really far apart, and they can't really share this information. I think this is probably the only scenario, but there's a lot of applications for reinforcement learning, such as agentic AI potentially, which could have this potential benefit of using attention or my framework. Does that answer it? Thank you.
Great presentation. Just a quick question. If you were to scale this up to 10 players or 10 players, what changes?
So this is my next steps. And that's actually the first thing on my next steps. Now, 10 players maybe is a little bit much. After all, the more players I have, the harder it is to learn. But there's something I do want to see. Is collaboration more important as there's more players? Is it maybe less important? It's a question. I don't know. Maybe it's something we need to test. I have a lot of things I also want to do, but that's number 1 on my agenda. So I don't really have an answer for you, but I guess I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And by order of elimination, I'd like to invite up Hugo as the winner of this year's Rosie Finals.
Is that the soccer team or who's yelling for you? You're welcome. Congrats.